Hello and welcome back to yet another edition of Rock Duck Radio's Musicians, Politicians, Magicians, and our ongoing series of the Pyramid Moon Connection. Today we'd like to talk about Pyramidions, and if you guys are not familiar with what a Pyramidion is, well, it's the little top pyramid that sits on top of the pyramid, if that makes sense. And plural for that would be pyramidia. And it's the capstone that we all know is missing. If you look at the back of the dollar bill, you will see a pyramid, but the capstone is missing. That capstone is actually called a pyramidion. And it's the capstone off of the Egyptian, not only the pyramids, but also the upper section of obelisks. And as we all know, obelisks also appear all around the planet, uniting the planet in peace from a long time ago. Now, as we all have been taught, the pharaohs of ancient, from that ancient sun-worshipping religion, so-called sun-worshipping religion, we'll get into that more into that later. I mean, it actually revolves around the solar system and monitoring it, because we seeded this planet with the moon and are calculating its trajectory. Therefore, we need to analyze its location between the moon, the sun, the earth, Saturn, and Mars, which is why those other two planets are also used in a lot of ancient civilizations and religious innuendos, and has meaning towards it with the Aztecs, with the Muslims, with Christianity, and so on and so on. So today we'd like to talk about how the pyramidion, the part that's always missing on top of the pyramid, and why that is, and what might be that reason. And before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the pyramids discovered in China. And I think in order for this to mean something a little more, I need to read a little bit about that discovery real quick, so that you'll have a full understanding of those capstones that were unlike the capstones we've been told or taught about in traditional literature and traditional history. We have been told that traditionally the capstones, the pyramidions, are coated with gold, with platinum, things of this nature, to augment the frequencies and the energy fields from its environment. And while some may have had those capstones, which is probably where this historical value comes from, the fact is we have evidence of crystal capstones. Yeah, that's right. Did you hear that? Capstones that were entirely made out of crystal. Now, as everyone likes to mock and make fun of, people that use crystals and yoga and believe in higher frequencies, it's amazing how those that built the pyramids and built the moon and put all of this stuff into existence understood the significance of crystals. And here recently, in the last decade or so, there's been a huge discovery of an underground cavern in the States with some massive crystals growing. But again, that's a topic for another discussion. So without further ado, we will read this little snippet real quick about the discovery of these crystal capstone pyramidions, and then we will get back into our discussion. More than 100,000 kilometers outside the ancient city of Xi'an, among the overgrown forest, rise scores of pyramid-shaped mounds that have been shrouded in mystery for thousands of years. The West learned about them when Fred Mayer Schroeder, an American trader, first reported the enigma in 1912. At the time, he was traveling through the Shaanxi province with a guide, where he recorded a thorough description in his diary, noting he had seen one giant pyramid approximately 1,000 feet tall and nearly twice that size and length, surrounded by a number of smaller pyramids. Fast forward 3 decades, and U.S. Air Force pilot James Gossman would be left mesmerized by a pure white structure spotted while flying over Asia, said to be twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. He said, and I quote, "The remarkable thing was the capstone, the Pyramidion, a huge piece of jewel-like material that could have been crystal. There was no way we could have landed, although we wanted to. We were struck by the immensity of the thing." And 2 years later, my friends, Colonel Maurice Sheehan, the Far Eastern director for Trans World Airline, reported the exact same experience. And in nearly early 90s, German investigator Hartwig Hausdorff searched for the massive pyramid, but due to the military restrictions and everything else, he was unable to get there. They are covered with trees and grass, and many date back over 8,000 years in this region. Wow. Crystal cap pyramids. Now, that revelation in and of itself is astonishing. And when we combine that with the metallic gold and platinum capstoned pyramidions in Egypt, then we start to get a bigger picture that maybe these things were being used for something in unison across the entire planet, which obviously leads to the conclusion that the entire planet was unified as one the further back in time we go. That no continents were needed to be discovered because we already had done all that, and you know, that's the illusion. That's the new history they're trying to sell us on. And again, that's a topic for another podcast. Today we're talking about the Pyramidions and how the ancient religions seem to bury their kings. At least that's how we see it. And again, I like to emphasize that everything we think of is viewed through modern interpretation of a false doctrine of history. So it's hard for me to try to explain the truth while still converting the terms to those listening that only have that understanding of the modern doctrine, because that modern doctrine was meant to paint a picture of falsehood, and it's those that buy into that so much, not just with Egyptologists and Egyptology, but with Christianity and Judaism and the Muslim religion. All of those have this, again, it's like so much is truth, but that little percent that's changed is a doozy. And what each one has done has tried to divide us from one another, whereas the further back in time we go, we keep seeing that we're more unified and stronger and better and together. So what happened? Well, let's get back into the Pyramidions and the capstones. Now, we seem to think that, like I said, the way we've been taught, that the pharaohs of ancient were all buried in the pyramids, and that is where the kings, those were their tombs. In other words, the pyramids in their historical narrative only existed to bury the kings. Now, all of us with modern historical knowledge know that that's a falsehood, that there was way more pyramids, and accountability and their uses extend way past that of just a burial site for one individual person. These places, these monuments, these constructions, these facilities are all over the planet. But the way history paints it, and this is the important part for this episode, they like to say that the old world is stuck in the pyramid thing, and that is people that, put their faith in the sun god, which is not a real god. It's just all this illusion and fakery, which is what they're trying to sell you on, while stealing all of that knowledge that has been transcended and passed down over the times and keeping it to the upper echelon. and making you think that those of the past were just so, a bunch of dumb effing idiots that all they could do was build grass huts and they didn't know, shite from shinola. But that's just not the case. The modern world as well extensively likes to use pyramids. However, these have been covered up and hidden from common knowledge. And we can get into one of the biggest known ones that shows I would have to say, there's always a dividing line between a this and a that, between a right and a left. I mean, obviously that's always shades of gray and it gets fuzzy. But when one can put it to a person or to a head or to something, we can pretty much narrow it down. And when we talk about switching from pharaohs and the old world and doctrines that most people don't have a comprehension of because that knowledge is no longer passed down or transcended to its youth, that switch happened with Moses and later the Old Testament. And then after that, we sprung up the three major religions that are constantly battling each other to this day, and we see that play out right now in real time. Moses, very predominant. He was a Hebrew teacher, a leader. He was considered the most important prophet in Judaism and one of the most important prophets in Christianity, as well as one of the most important prophets in Islam. And that's why Moses is such an important figurehead that does the transition between the Pharaoh to the new modern Abrahamic religions. And it's important we denote that transitional time and how they try to dissuade us from anything prior to Moses, while yet saying from here hence since is the real gospel that you must believe in. And it's also predominant in Samaritanism, Rastafarianism, and according to the Bible and the Quran, Moses was the leader of the Israelites, a lawgiver. He has a prophetic authorship of the Torah. And that was the first 5 books of the original Bible. They're attributed to him. And according to the book of Exodus, Moses was born in a time when his people, the Israelites, an enslaved minority. Now we keep talking about black people being enslaved, but when we look at Moses and the Israelites, these were all white people, and they were an enslaved minority, were increasing in population. And as a result, the Egyptian Pharaoh, so again, there's that transitional time, worried that they might ally themselves with Egypt's enemies. Moses' Hebrew mother secretly hid him when Pharaoh ordered all newborn Hebrew boys to be killed in order to reduce the population of the Israelites. Now, I don't need to get into this full story of everything, because if you want to learn that, we'll go read the Bible. Go read the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, all of them. Don't hide any of them from your knowledge. But my point is, everyone knows who Moses is. But, and not only everyone, when I say everyone, I mean within all of the major religions. That's a big feat, right? Especially since all the major religions are feuding against one another. So it never ceases to amaze me then when you find out people like Moses were part of the new kingdom, and their tombs were private underground tombs, and they were marked on the surface with Pyramidions. Now, isn't that interesting? And the 4 lateral sides included text and scenes related to the cult of the sun god as representation of Pharaoh, which is why I keep saying that's a misnomer. It has nothing to do with the sun god. It has everything to do with, they knew that the moon is artificial. It parked itself there to terraform the earth. The pyramids are sending signals back to that moon so it can adjust in real time. And on the scribe of Moses' Pyramidion, which is made of limestone and is of the 19th dynasty, part of the New Kingdom, it depicts himself making an offering to the sun god with his name on two opposite faces. The adjacent opposite faces feature a baboon. Now that reminds me of Thoth, doesn't it? And the Garrett heritage line. And the tablets, the emerald tablets, the King's List. Now we're going back to Sumerian times and prior. Why would Moses's burial pyramidium have those depictions on it? Interesting. And it's screeching upon the rising of the sun and the day. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I know a lot of people are familiar with Jehovas Witnesses, and that religion was founded by Charles Taze Russell, and very little people know that when he founded it in the late 1800s, it originated as a branch of a Bible student movement, which developed in the United States in 1870, among the followers of the Christian Restorationist minister, Charles Taze Russell. And it developed into what it is today, Jehovah's Witness. Now, he also is the founder of Russell Athletic Sportswear. Interesting. But very little people know that he too, when he passed, wanted to be buried underground and have a pyramidium placed on top of him. So it's interesting that we have Moses, pretty much the founder of all religions, all modern religions, post-Egyptologist and Sumerian and all these ancient cultures, with the beginning of the Old Testament and then the New Testament, and then we have the Quran, we have the Torahs, we have all of these things that come from that. So it's interesting. And then in the late 1800s, the 19th century, but basically, we have another creation of a religious sect. And again, he too decides to be buried under a pyramidium. So what is it about these people that they know something that you do not know? Well, now you do know. The pyramids were built here they're acoustic for one, and those acoustic signals are reading the growth rate of Gaia, because our planet is still growing to this day. Our pyramids are still functioning, and they're still sending to this day, right now, as you're listening to this, at this very moment, signals back to the moon. And that moon is interpreting those earth adjustments and her growth, and she breathes. So she expands, she contracts, she expands, she contracts. This causes a lot of, you guessed it, climate. I can't say the second word because then this video will be flagged, but that's right. The moon controls the water, water controls the weather, weather controls the climate, and that is the fact of reality. All religions are based around that in their fundamental knowledge of what they know. And further down the line, they have been keeping more and more of that a secret. Think about Christianity for a second. The Vatican owns the largest telescope on the planet. And it's a little, when you turn things into letters, I forget what that is, not an anagram, but you know what I mean. But when you shorten all of what it means, it turns into Lucifer. So their largest telescope on the planet is named Lucifer, and it's owned by the Vatican. So whether it was religions from the Aztec times, religions from ancient China or ancient Russia, all these places where the pyramids were there. And so we can't really use those names like China and Russia and all those, because guess what? Those names came post. All of those things came post Abrahamic religions. And we need to go back to the names of these locations prior to. Because all new names given, hence since the old world, and given in this new modern world, and this modern world keeps recreating itself. Now we've got the new world order, So it happens over and over and over again. This is how these political charlatans work, these grifters that they used to be biblical or religious grifters, and that was fading out, and religion in a lot of places is still political and their politics, and vice versa. The United States is unique where we had that separation of powers and separation of church and state. But you have to understand that in a lot of these Islamic regions, that is the control factor, and governments do not exist other than under that rule of emphasis. And the amazing thing is, it seems like a family feud to me. All of it's under the Abrahamic base. But that's, again, another topic for another story. I'd like to end it with what we were saying is the names of places. It's amazing how the new era has divided us by changing the names and then changing the names again and then changing the names again. And you can see it happening in the United States right now with the push with BLM and how they're pushing to change certain roads, certain areas, certain hospital names, certain airport names. How they're removing statues of old and getting rid of the old names, how they're wanting to change currency and put in new people with new names. And this happens everywhere. Everyone around the planet has witnessed this. Anyone who's spent enough time in their own countries or been around to other countries and studied currencies and stamps and anything that we can keep track of real history with, where current political movements can't erase that history, so to speak, because they don't choose to look in certain areas that we can still find real history buried in. And that's where we find ourselves today, is a bunch of corrupt individuals using government doctrine and government tools and paperwork as a means of control over the rest of the people. Now remember, governments in and of themselves are not evil, just like guns don't shoot people, cars don't run people over. It all comes down to evildoers against, good people, people with morality against people that have no morals. And this is that eye of the needle talked about, that he or she, the entity that can get through that eye of the needle, will control the moon, and the moon controls the planet. I'll let you ponder on that one.
Can you hear me? Hold up. Wait, no.